Yeah, I know. As always. It's hard to get used to the darkness too. The first week of daylight saving.
Did your kids adapt okay? Because I remember that was so hard.
It's definitely gotten easier.
As they get older.
I don't remember anything anymore.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight for this wonderful discussion on the asylum process and the stories behind it. This is a part of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire's T. Williams and Patricia Ayers Global Tipping Point series. Yes, that is quite the mouthful, but we like to come up with creative names and keep adding to them. So again, thank you to everyone who has joined us here in person, as well as to the online audience watching live or the recording. We really appreciate your interest in this conversation. My name is Tim Horgan. I am the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit membership organization, and we are here basically to help people better understand the world around them. We achieve that through speakers programs, podcasts, international visitor exchanges, and our new high school diplomacy programs. So if you're interested in learning more about any of those, happy to have those conversations with you. As a membership organization, we are community supported, so thank you to all of our wonderful donors and sponsors and members, those both here tonight and watching. We really appreciate your support and your engagement with our work in making these kinds of things possible. A special thank you to both of our sponsors here in the room today for this wonderful series, Building Community in New Hampshire, and the New Hampshire Fulbright Association, New Hampshire chapter of the Fulbright Association, as well as to the Ayers family for their generous gift for this series. We really appreciate all of the support we receive, including from Southern New Hampshire University, our mission partner in all we do. Also, as a nonpartisan organization, we do not take stances on policy or issues or politics. We are here to be the platform for conversations and for understanding. What you do with the information that you hear tonight is up to you, and of course, as always, the thoughts and opinions of the speakers are their own, and it's up to you to decide what you think of their opinions. But we'll have a great conversation tonight. Before I introduce our wonderful panel, I'd like to invite Bill DeVries up from New Hampshire Fulbright to give a few words.
Hi, the New Hampshire chapter of the Fulbright Association is, as a member of the Fulbright Association, a nonprofit, also non-associate or non-affiliated private organization, mostly of Fulbright alumni, but also friends thereof, and it supports the Fulbright program. The Fulbright program is the official exchange program supported by the U.S. Department of State. It is funded generally, in fact, I think universally, jointly by the countries it's located in, 120 of them at this point, I think, and the U.S. They usually share roughly 50-50. There are all kinds of programs. For this audience, there are, although you think that the Fulbright program focuses on students and therefore a younger crowd, it's not really true. There are also programs, the Fulbright Specialist Program, for instance, which brings in Fulbright, or brings in people who know various different skills and want to either bring them here, they can learn how we do things, or we can send them there to exchange ideas about various different kinds of things, all kinds of different things. For this audience, what I'd also like to emphasize for you is that the Fulbright program is the most effective form of diplomacy I think we have, and it's all too often a bit under threat. People sometimes want to defund it, so I encourage you all to write your congressman to keep supporting the Fulbright program, to keep extending our understanding of other cultures and countries, and to bring them here so they can better understand us, because that's the way you keep the peace. So, Tim?
Thank you, Bill. All right, I will join our panelists here without hopefully collapsing our backdrop on them. Would not be a good start. So I want to take a quick moment because I want to spend as much time talking to our panelists as we can to give a little bit of an introduction. So to my immediate right, we have Khaleel Shreet, who's the senior coach and director of the New Hampshire program of Duet. He is a successful asylum seeker. I'm not sure exactly the right term. We'll figure that out tonight. But he came to the U.S. from Syria. Currently pursuing a doctorate in education at SNHU, and he continues to work with students on providing pathways to higher education through his work at Duet. Then next to Khaleel, we have Janet Polasky. She retired in May of 2023, so congratulations there, although I hear these retirements don't always stick. So good luck with that. I hope you find your next career. And you know, once an author, always an author. Janet is the author of, I believe, 6 books. Is that correct? And her most recent one is on the history of asylum. If you're here tonight, there's some information on that book out at the registration table, along with a discount code for 30% off. So I highly recommend picking that up to further your understanding of the asylum process and its history. It came out earlier this year from Yale University Press. So Janet was a professor of history, presidential professor of history at UNH, and had a long and outstanding career with many awards that we won't go through them all right now. But she has a really great background and will be able to provide some really interesting insights for tonight's conversation. And last but not least, we have Lina Shayo, who's a partner at MesaLaw here in Manchester, New Hampshire. Lina came to the U.S. when she was 14 from Kenya, so as an immigrant herself, which is one of the many, many reasons why we wanted to hear her voice here tonight. She works to help people of all sorts of immigration status, including asylum seekers, to successfely get their status here in New Hampshire and the broader region. And yeah, so that's our wonderful panel. Do you guys mind turning on that microphone just so that we have it? And yeah, so I want to just sort of start the conversation off here you have, Jenny, to ask the question. And Janet, I think this is going to come first to you, but what is asylum? It is a word that is used a lot, and I think a lot of times maybe incorrectly, as people are just sort of throwing words out there, refugee, asylee. So can you help us understand a little bit about what asylum is and where it came from?
Sure. So asylum means sanctuary, offered to those who, according to Hannah Arendt, a philosopher forced to flee Nazi Germany, sanctuary offered to those who were forced to become outlaws through circumstances beyond their control. So the word asylum comes from the Greek. I won't refer to Bill back there to give us the full, meaning a place free of violence and safeguarded from incursion. Now I'm looking at a period before, and for the contemporary definition, I'm definitely going to turn to Lina. But if we look at the period before the Second World War, there are asylum seekers, but it doesn't have an international legal definition. So in the 18th and 19th centuries, when there are definitely asylum seekers, there are no formal legal guarantees. Asylum at that point means permission to remain on the territory and to be offered humane standards of treatment. And I think that's an important characteristic to retain when we're talking about what asylum means today. because asylum really doesn't assume its legal definition until 1951, which is the year the UNHCR was formed and the Convention on Refugees was signed. I just want to talk, before we talk about current asylum law, I think it's really important to step back and maybe out of our box a bit to understand that if we look back, and here again I'll look at Bill DeVries, but if we look back to 1795, when we get what has become a really standard definition of asylum, it means, according to Immanuel Kant, in perpetual peace, and he's writing during a period of incredibly intense warfare. He said it's hospitality owed a visiting foreigner. So what he says is everyone, by being a human being, has the right to visit, quote, to offer themselves as potential members of society as long as they behave peacefully. Again, I think we still have that sense. So I think what we need to remember is asylum has its foundations in the 18th century in cosmopolitanism, in that sense of a society looking outwards and guaranteeing the rights of all human beings. So it has its origins in the sense of our universal rights as a human being before we're talking of nation states. And I think we need to keep that in mind as we start looking at what are international laws, which actually then are how do nation states have to behave.
And actually, before we go to Lina, can you just talk a little bit about the difference between refugee and asylee, if that's in your wheelhouse?
It is, but I think you would be better at that.
I feel like we're going to play musical microphones,
Right.
because I love how you have started, and I wish you had also talked about sort of like the historical place in the 19th century and how we are beginning to look and think about asylum after World War II, or maybe during World War II, when asylum seekers were coming to the United States and we didn't have any asylum law and any way to protect them, and then after World War II, when we were thinking, oh, the war to end all wars, we're going to enter a period of peace. Here, let's make this law, and then people are people. We don't have that much peace. So the legal definition of asylum, again, it comes from 1951 and the UN being created, and this desire between nation states to create safety for people. And then we didn't really have a Refugee Act in the United States until 1980. It took us a little bit of time to actually write it down. But that definition comes from that time. And in the law, we define asylum seekers as refugees, and then we define refugees as people who are outside their country of nationality or their country of origin, who cannot return back to their countries because either their government or a group that their government cannot control will persecute them or has persecuted them because of something about themselves that they cannot change. And we define that thing that they cannot change as their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or being a member of a particular social group. And whenever I'm teaching about asylum, I define a particular social group as, maybe the easiest one is if you are a member of an LGBT group in a country that has no protection for those people. So it's very easy to say, okay, that's something about, or at least in our society, we believe that is something about yourself that you cannot change. And so if you are living somewhere where either your country or a group that your country cannot control is trying to hurt you because of that thing, then you can come here and you can seek asylum. You can seek safety. That's a mouthful, but that's what it is.
Great.
Yeah.
And Khaleel, as someone who has been through the process, can you talk a little bit about what asylum sort of means to you and how that process sort of played out in your life?
Well, asylum meant to me seeking protection here. I mean, I arrived here in the country back in 2013 on an F1 visa. I mean, back in early in 20...
Sorry, real quick, for those who don't know, F1 visa?
A student visa.
Student visa.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So back home, early 2013, I was wrapping up my last year of college when the circumstances or situation was very unstable back home. And there is a law back home where upon graduation from college or school, young men have to join the military. It must be drafted. And at that time, that meant participating in the killing or violence against the Syrian people, something I wanted to escape. So I had about 15 days after graduating from college to leave the country. The only destination that I had possible at that point was Turkey. I had for a while wanted to go to the UK. We had a connection with a professor at Oxford who promised back long ago to help go there and study, but it became difficult when the circumstances were very unstable there to get a UK visa. But had a connection with someone here that works for SNHU that suggested I try to apply for the university. Stayed there for in Turkey for about 7 months, following the process between taking some ESL or English tests, exams, preparing for the interview, and getting accepted for the school. And fortunately, I got everything processed very smoothly. Came here in 2013, and I still had a hope that things would improve back home. So I did not directly apply for asylum. Was very optimistic, unreasonably. And stretched it. People that apply for asylum here must submit their application within 1 year of arriving to the United States. So I exactly submitted my case on the very last day of that period, when I completely lost hope that I would be able to go home and avoid being in the military or participate in the violence, or getting oppressed myself, because I also participated I starred in a short film that highlighted the violence of the Syrian government here in the country, which made it even more difficult for me to return home. So at that point, I submitted my asylum case on my own. I did not have the resources to hire a lawyer, not something that everyone can do. And I quite honestly thought back then that the process would be straightforward. I had a detained brother back then. I was detained for a short period myself, and the situation was clear to anyone that would like to assess it. People were getting oppressed, people were killed. It was horrible. So I assumed that because I entered the country lawfully here, that the law would be on my side. But, well, to describe my experience in the asylum process in one word, it was overshadowed by disappointment, extreme sense of disappointment. Submitted my asylum 2014, my case for asylum 2014, and I maintained my student visa because I came here to get my master's from SNHU, completed my master's, got another master's, finished off my doctorate recently.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I waited a year and two to get my employment authorization card to be able to work here, and it took much longer than would normally the process would take. I applied for TPS, temporary protected status, which you would assume it's temporary protected status you would get granted quickly to get my employment authorization. Still, it took about 3 years to get my employment authorization card, and all this through this time, my wife and I were here working as students, getting paid minimum wage, and we were in a position where we were unable to travel to reconnect with family. I lost 2 siblings during this time. I lost my grandfather. My wife lost her dad, and the process stretched 10 years until early this year we were approved and we were finally able to reconnect with the family back home. So it's a relief that we are where we are at this point. We just got approved, but again, the process was full of disappointment. We were expecting to be treated in a more humane way, given that asylum is a humane effort, right? To protect people and let them live in a humane standard of life. I don't think that we accomplished that, or we lived through the process.
Sure. Well, thank you for sharing, and I hope reconnecting with family back home has been a positive experience. I know you guys were over there earlier this year, so you got some good time over there. I think couple weeks, right?
A couple months.
Couple months, great. And things seem to be maybe not turning out the way some people in Syria hoped, but at least winding down a little bit in terms of the violence. Is that an accurate assessment, or?
A little bit. A little bit. I mean, the Syrian regime is still, I mean, the sense of stability that has seemed to be happening there at this point is because of the regime gaining back control of most of the country. But where my parents live and where most of the people that are strongly against the regime or vocal against the regime, they live in northern Syria in Idlib province, where I'm from. And the regime, randomly, bombs areas, including that caused, hundreds or thousands of deaths over the past few years, including the loss of my only sister a couple years ago.
All right. Tough to follow that up. But basically, I'd love to hear from all of you as to, we've heard that this can be a very long and difficult process. So what are some of those hurdles that people who are here to apply for asylum experience, and what are some of the solutions that you have seen to be effective?
I can talk about hurdles for sure.
Yeah.
I don't have solutions.
No, you guys told me you figured this all out beforehand. You've got all the answers, so let's hear them.
Yeah. The main challenge was that I personally felt that the process was dehumanizing. Again, back to the maintaining standard basics or basic standards of living, I did not see that. You start with the ability to work. When I have an application for asylum, I can apply for an employment authorization card. It used to take about a year and a half for my employment authorization card to arrive, and it's valid for about a year and a half. So I get it with a few months of validity. Sometimes I get it fresh, but when it's time to reapply, it's often that my existing card will be expired. They send me an extension letter that's unofficial. It's just a piece of paper that a lot of places would not accept. Plus, getting a driver license was a very difficult thing as well. With an expired employment authorization card, I can only renew my driver license for 100 days. And every time I have to renew my driver license, I cannot even go to the DMV here in Manchester. I have to go to a special department in Concord to show them all the document and confirm again that I'm going through the process, prove that I am actively waiting for pending authorization for work and for my asylum decision, and I would get another 100 days extension. But the main challenge for me was inability to go reconnect with the family or friends. And for us Syrians at this point, we're spread all over the world. I have friends and family members in Europe and lots of parts of the country. My wife's family is back home in Germany. Back in Germany, and we were married for 9 years before I got to meet them. We had 2 kids before I got to meet them, and sadly, my wife lost her dad when I never got the chance to meet him. For what? For just being, in a process that could have been avoided. The thing is that when you have a pending asylum application, you do not qualify for a travel document, a refugee travel document. I was only eligible to get an advance parole, which is a permission to leave the country, but I still needed to have a valid passport. And for me to renew my Syrian passport, I had to pay like $1,500 to the Syrian government that killed 2 of my siblings. That did not make sense. I was seeking refuge from that government that had been using these dollars to kill civilians. So during this time, I was feeling very disconnected, from family, from friends, from all those that I grew up with. Again, I lost people. I would not be able to see them again. And at some point, I was questioning the point of stretching this process out and waiting even longer, because what would the value be in getting approved for asylum and feeling safe if I do not get to share any of these, major life moments that I'm going through with those that I love? So, again, it's sense of uncertainty, being very disconnected from everyone, and challenges when it comes to work and just live here.
Thank you.
Practical, you want to go next? I'll follow you.
All right, we'll save the best for last. Gosh, I feel like Khaleel has explained the human cost, or like the human suffering that I hear every day in my office. I think that the process necessarily, because it's a bureaucratic process, strips people away, like their humanity away. It's difficult. Access to justice is difficult, and then when you have language barrier issues, when you have people with trauma, when people are fleeing for their lives, I don't think that, sometimes I'll ask my students, like, pretend that it was you and you had to run for your life, what would you take? And it ranges from, I'll grab my cats to I'll grab my book. And so, when people are running for their lives, people don't think, oh wait, let me get my birth certificate because I need to prove that I am who I say I am, or let me go to the police station and get the police report that will prove that I reported to the police this thing that happened to me, and then they didn't do anything. And then when you come into the United States, we understand government processes, we understand like the bureaucracy, and we're upset about it, but we understand that this is, you have to go to this office, you have to fill this form, you have to fill it out correctly or they will return it back to you. But that is also like a difficult thing for people who are not growing up or well versed in the system to understand. And then the system itself is complicated. Khaleel talks about getting a piece of paper that says, okay, we've extended your work permit for 540 days, but he can't even go to the DMV and show that piece of paper because he has to go to a special place at a special DMV to show the piece of paper and only get 6 months, not even the 540 days, even though the piece of paper says 540 days. And that's also like a state-specific problem, because my clients in Massachusetts just passed a law that allows people who are undocumented or even going through this process to just get a driver's license, right? And so if other states, Vermont has had that law for a long time, Connecticut has had that law for a long time, we don't have it here in New Hampshire. So the comments in the audience are we turned it down. And so, like the process or even the experience of seeking asylum can differ greatly amongst people who know each other. So if Khaleel had a friend in Florida or Connecticut, they don't understand what he's talking about when he says, I can't even get a driver's license, because they can get driver's licenses.
Real ID.
Or even get a real ID, which means can't get on an airplane, can't get into a federal building. The immigration court's a federal building. How are you gonna go to your hearing? So like it's such a disparate experience amongst people. Access to justice is not easy. And then there's a right to an attorney if you provide one for yourself. I gave you the definition of asylum. It is an incredibly technical definition. A lot of people don't, a lot of people like asylum, protection, refuge. I'm here, please protect me. And yet I have to be like, no, it's these 7 things that I have to prove, and I have to prove with specificity, because if I don't, a person may not believe the thing that you're saying. You may be found incredible, which as an attorney, I'm like, oh, credibility is not really the truth. It just means that what you're saying is consistent and it makes sense. And you're all looking at me like, what? Credibility is the truth. Yeah, no, it means different things. So I think just that overall the process is opaque and it takes a really long time. 10 years is a really long time to wait just to feel safe. And it's difficult for me to hear it even from your experience, and I hear the stories consistently. So I can only imagine for your audience what it must feel like.
And I'm sure the experience is different for people coming from different countries as well, and different backgrounds with different language skills and financial resources and all of that kind of fun stuff.
No, 100%, right? So if you have a person who is being evacuated from Afghanistan, that was a chaotic evacuation, but it is also a society that does not think about dates, documents, names, how we think of those things. And I've had a very robust education in what's your date of marriage? I don't know. Are you, like what is the piece of paper? Like, what is the piece of paper that means or shows you're married to this person? It doesn't exist, because in their society, you wouldn't live with someone if you're not married to them. It just doesn't even make any sense why I would ask for a piece of paper to prove the thing that they're saying. So cultural differences make a big impact, and gosh, you hope that your asylum officer is educated on the and is culturally competent, but a lot of the times that's the education you're giving. Oh my gosh, let me let somebody else speak.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, as we were talking before, we can all identify the incredible bureaucracy and the hurdles and the inhumanity of the asylum process. And it forces us to step back again and think, why is it this way? And why is it so hard, given what we know about crises around the world? And why is it so hard to grant someone safety? Why is it so difficult for us to recognize that I think back to Thomas Paine, you can tell I work on the 18th century, but who talks in common sense about creating an asylum for mankind in America. So why is it this way? And we were just talking about the international law. And because international law is what, since the Second World War, establishes the right to asylum. But what it establishes is the right for nations to grant asylum. It does not establish the right for individuals to be guaranteed asylum. Because if you look at the law, there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it guarantees you the right to leave a country. So you're guaranteed the right to movement. And it guarantees you the right to seek asylum from persecution. And it guarantees you the right to a nationality. Well, what happens if you're caught between nations? Because nations are where we get our human rights. And so what happens if you've been forced to leave one nation, but you can't enter legally another nation? And Linda Kerber, who's a historian who writes about this period, talks about it as a Kafkaesque legal situation. That is, it's asymmetrical. We have the right to leave, but not the right to enter. And so it catches people stateless. And when you think of where our rights come from, I mean, some of them are state rights, so driver's licenses, but a lot of the rights are national rights. So we have this international law, but it's based on the nation state and the rights of the nation state. And then you take a nation state like ours, where immigration, and especially even now today, asylum policy is so political. Then what happens to the rights of asylum seekers?
Well, that's a perfect transition to the next question I had. In terms of changes to the asylum process, we have seen some swings, we'll say, between administrations. So can you give us a bit of a sense of what kind of impact different administrations can have on the process, and how, for you, Khaleel, how going from the Obama to the Trump to the Biden administrations, did that have an impact on sort of your experience? Was it did things change, or was it just sort of a bigger issue than what you were experiencing?
I believe it was the same. I mean, generally people assume that under democratic administrations, asylum process is much smoother or easier. I applied under the Obama administration, and my case was approved earlier this year again. And I was under so much illusion when I first came here. Again, when I started the process, I mean, when you think about the U.S., it's the crown jewel of developed nations. However, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm using the right term here, but it's a third world country when it comes to immigration laws and policies, quite honestly. It's again, the whole process with all its faults was again full of disappointments and full of challenges and barriers. And again, I just talked about getting my, like applying for asylum, how it was challenging, how it took a very long time, not being able to travel. But at times, bombing intensified back home. And back in 2016, I mean, Syria was under the spotlight back then with what was happening at that time. And I, reached out to the senator here in New Hampshire. She was great. She was, very sympathetic about what was happening. She was trying to support. I thought, there may be a way to bring my family back home here to safety. But I realized soon after that was a very unreasonable ask, even from a U.S. senator. It turned out that it is something quite impossible to accomplish. And again, after that, I lost my sister, and I lost, again, my brother. And I put so much effort writing letters and submitting requests to be able to get them here, or to be able to reunite with them. I just wanted to go back there, see them, not home. I realized I couldn't go home. That was very risky for me. But reconnecting with them outside Syria was quite impossible as well. But even even after getting approved for my asylum, I am not done. So
Do you have residency?
I have asylum granted status. That is my official status. So after getting approved for my asylum, it takes or I can apply for a green card after a year of receiving my approval. And around 2 years after applying for a green card, or so these days, I received my green card. And around 5 years after, or no less than 5 years, I can apply for citizenship. So the whole process, if it goes smooth, would have taken me 17 to 18 years, or around 18 years. So
Which has got to be around half your lifetime at this point.
Again, all this time I was asking myself, is all I want is to be safe? Do you think that people assume that asylum seekers just want to be safe, they're going to be happy? No, they want to live in dignity. They want to, again, maintain their life, connect to their family, be able to grow and be successful. And again, to me, I was able to achieve some level of success here, despite all the barriers that were that I faced here through the process, primarily because of the support that I received from Southern New Hampshire University, from Dr. LeBlanc. President LeBlanc. He was great. He personally supported me in lots of meaningful ways. So that to me truly made the difference, but very, very few people are as lucky in that. And again, even after I received my asylum approval, I applied for a travel document. I would be qualified for a travel document to be able to go and meet my parents-in-law, or my wife's mom, reconnect with my family. The estimated wait time was 1.5 years to get it. We submitted 3 requests for expediting process because my wife lost her dad. 2 of them were denied. Then my wife was approved. I was denied. There was no way for me to travel. I had to again involve a U.S. senator who submitted personally a letter to USCIS to expedite the approval process, which overall took 5 months. Now 5 months, I received my travel document that I can travel with for only 9 months, because you can't leave the country with less than 3 months of validity in the travel document. Now I had to make quick travel plans. I'm very grateful to reconnect with the family and friends, but it's one time. I told them I had no idea when I would be able to see you again, because I applied for a renewal, and it takes another 1.5 years, maybe 2 years to get it, right? And I don't know when that would be. So it's again, barrier after barrier. It's a lot of challenge.
So let's go to Lina and sort of hear from you more currently or recently how political winds can shift things, and then Janet will give you a chance to respond more holistically or long view.
Sure. So the asylum law doesn't change because laws are I was going to say granted by Congress, but Congress makes the law or passes the bills, the president signs the law, and then we have the law. And we all know that Congress is very deadlocked, so unless Congress passes a new law, every president is acting under the laws that have existed since, I think maybe the 90s is when we had any sort of like change in the asylum law. Again, the asylum law was written in the 80s. And the immigration law, comprehensive immigration law, was written in the 50s. So we are in 2023 with the world as it looks like today, fighting about AI and what it means, and our immigration law, as we think about it, was written in 1952 and asylum law in 1980. The world has changed dramatically in that time, dealing with government bureaucracies, nothing is nimble, right? Nothing is malleable, and everything is very rigid. And so the places that we may see the most difference is what the president can control through executive action or through what has already been designated to him through the Constitution. So usually it's the border, right? That's where we're going to see a lot of movement. And that changes dramatically between the presidents. And so I would say the previous administration had a deterrent foot forward, and a lot of their policies or the previous policies around the border was preventing or deterring people from coming to the United States. And that's why we would have policies like separating parents from their children, because boy, is that a deterrent, right? If you think I'm going to show up and they're going to take my kid away from me, maybe I don't show up. Or it is a program called Remain in Mexico, where people could show up to the United States and ask for asylum, but they could not come into the United States to process those claims. They would have to wait in Mexico for their asylum claims to be heard by a U.S., so the judge is in the United States, they're in Mexico, and then that's how their asylum claims would get heard. Judge, U.S., prosecutor, U.S., if you're lucky enough to get an attorney, you hope that they're going to cross the border and come into Mexico and be with you doing this asylum claim. So deterrence. And then this administration is, I think a lot of the policies that we're seeing are alternatives to legal pathways for coming into the United States. So within this administration, they have used what's called the parole power, which is, parole is just a fancy legal term that says, we'll let you come into the United States and enter the United States. And so we see parole with, for example, Ukraine. A lot of people who are coming from Ukraine with a war are able to make an application, find a U.S. financial sponsor, and come into the United States for up to 2 years. Similar programs for Haitians, Nicaraguans, Cubans, Afghans. Afghans are able to come into the United States through a parole power. So basically trying to figure out another way that people can come into the United States that is not that very dangerous crossing or asking for asylum at the border, but once you're here, you still have to go through the process and ask for asylum. So the big, writ large, deterrence versus alternatives to legal entry, and then every president just pushes the mandate or the agenda that they have. But Khaleel's experience is going to be everybody's experience, because the law itself doesn't change once you're here. Asking for asylum looks like 10 years of backlogs before there's some kind of decision. Jack.
Yeah, I guess it becomes clearer that the system is broken,
Yes.
that in part it's a question of the administrations, in part it's a question of being understaffed in courts and in terms of attorneys, but in part I think it's just also that the system doesn't work, that the international law does not guarantee asylum. That is, it is not, and it's certainly not up to the numbers of people who are needing safety from whatever is the condition, whatever the conditions that they have at home. That is the number of people who have to leave home and go somewhere else. And we talk about what are the differences between refugee and asylee, and who's just coming here for a better life just. And we were talking about it, you don't leave for light causes. And Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Miserables, in the middle of the 19th century said, these definitions of refugee or migrant or immigrant, they really don't mean anything. What the term he used was les éprouvés, or those who have been tested. And it seems like that's exactly what we're talking about. So I guess I would ask, again, as a historian stepping back, if this situation, if international law is not working, I mean, it seems that we've shown that it's broken. Do we just keep trying to reform it, or do we need a completely different system? And I think one of the interesting alternatives was actually by the convener of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was Eleanor Roosevelt. And she looked at the system and at nation states and said, well, we could keep trying to reform international law. Let's find some one-size-fits-all universal solution. But that's probably not going to work. And I think we've seen attempts to reform international law. Usually we don't, U.S. doesn't sign on to them. Problem number one. But so what she said is, why don't we look at where people actually establish themselves? Why don't we look where people find their identity? And she said, people get their rights in neighborhoods, in the small spaces. That's where they call home. And I think so that was actually why I wrote my book, was to look at, okay, in history, what are the alternatives to nation states guaranteeing asylum? Are there other places? And we're talking about getting driver's licenses, or in certain cities, getting the ability to vote. And if we look historically, that's actually where in the 18th and 19th centuries people established asylum, is that they found security in a neighborhood where they shopped, where they knew each other. And so, and it was interesting as I looked at these other examples of asylum, that here are cities, Altona and Hamburg during the period of the French Revolution, when everything is chaotic. But these two cities, one's Danish, one's German, they decided to let anyone in who wanted to come in, basically. And you know what? They were the cities that thrived, because they were the cities that had a really robust commerce and who maintained diplomatic neutrality. Or if a few decades later, when Belgium was a new nation, so again, a small space, they have part of their constitution guarantees full rights to anyone on their territory. It doesn't limit them to citizenship. Only political rights are limited, so you can't vote. But you have rights to employment, to marriage, to travel. So, and who was one of the first people who tested that? Karl Marx came in after he had been thrown out of Prussia and out of France. Now, this is probably about as dangerous an asylum seeker as you want to bring in. And yet, what actually happened, the Belgians granted him a residence permit. He only had to sign something saying he promised not to overthrow the king, which worked fine because he wasn't that interested in Belgian politics anyway. His sights were afield. But what happened was that members of parliament also were listening to Marx. Marx was listening to them. And you know, the country that did not experience a revolution in 1848 was Belgium, where Karl Marx was and where they had made the changes because there was a voice and because there was this discussion. So I think we see in history examples of places that have opened their doors, and they've been the ones that have flourished.
Okay, Thank you, panelists. I see we've got about 10 minutes for questions. I could ask questions all night, but I guess I will turn the microphone over to the audience. We do have an audience mic for questions in the room. If you're watching online, we do have a chat function on our homepage, as well as you can send your questions to council@wacnh.org. I'll be looking on my phone. I am not checking, sports scores or anything like that. But if election returns, sure. If you've got questions about that, we'll talk later. But yeah, Rick, I think if you just want to wait for the mic.
Bring it back to New Hampshire. Do you have any idea how many asylum seekers there are in New Hampshire? And what kind of supports are they getting? That's part 2. And 3, my organization works with official refugees primarily. We're not really allowed to use any of the money we get through the federal government to do that work. But what could we be doing? What should we be doing to support asylum seekers?
We're handing you the microphone.
All right. So I think it would be really hard to figure out the exact number of asylum seekers, because once someone enters the United States, this is the jewel of the experimented open borders. We do not have closed borders between states, so I can enter in Texas, and tomorrow I can be in Boston, and it could be by choice or by busing, but that's another discussion. So it's hard to track the movements of people within the United States. But in New Hampshire, we do have a robust number of people, and I think we can tell from this because our immigration court is the Boston Immigration Court, and they have high numbers of people. It's one of the top 10 immigration courts in the country, so just by reference, we know that we have robust numbers in the state of New Hampshire. I think your second question was, how do we help people who are asylum seekers in New Hampshire? And I think that part of the thing that makes asylum seekers successful in New Hampshire, and as Khaleel has lifted up, is the support that people get from their neighborhoods. And by and large, far and away, Americans are incredibly welcoming people. I know people who are doing host homes and are receiving people who have been just through very traumatic events coming into the United States and being placed in detention, and when they come out of detention, there's nowhere to go, and I can literally call someone and say, hey, can you take this person? And by the magic of neighborhoods, eventually someone will call me and be like, yeah, we have a place for them to stay. So this is regular people in New Hampshire who are opening up their homes for people who are asylum seekers, saying you can stay until you get on your feet. And so it's the people showing up, doing the work, loving people back to life. And then for organizations, even though you cannot use federal dollars to help asylum seekers because they do not have access to any of those benefits, but I think there's a lot of programs that maybe an organization like yours would be aware of where people can have English training, job training, things like that. And those resources are immensely helpful. Khaleel has shared so much about how difficult it was to work in a minimum wage job and wait for that work permit. But then once you have a work permit and you have some skills, things open up a little bit. And if someone can, your ability to, I think it was the program on refugees a few weeks ago, and they were talking about getting a job is difficult, but if you can speak English, getting a job is much easier, right? And the first program, I think the person was talking about how Walmart will hire a whole bunch of people and one of them will speak English and he will be the communicator, but everybody gets a job. So, English programs are good, and things like that. Workforce opportunities are good because work gives dignity. And if you're thinking of a 10-year process, dignity is really important within that process. That's a great question. Thanks.
Yes. I just want to add that, it's definitely the community and, supportive employers for sure. Because, if I had been working for another employer, aside from SNHU and Duet, I doubt that they would be as understanding of, the delays in my employment authorization renewals. I had to get some unpaid leaves, my wife and I, for a month or two, at times where the extension even for the card would expire, and we did not have We have not received the renewed card yet. So that was key. But in terms of support, aside like official support, federal support, none. There is no support at all. We don't even have access to financial aid, federal financial aid, to be able to go to school and continue education. So you talk about how the international law is broken. I do agree with that. But I believe that particularly U.S. international law possibly is the one that's broken the most, because they have friends, they have colleagues, they have known many other people that seek asylum in other countries in Europe. And there, right, when you apply for asylum, you have access to education, to professional development, to job placement, to unemployment security. But that does not exist here. So again, unless this community employer support is in place here to bring life to the lives of asylum seekers, it's incredibly challenging and difficult to make things work.
And it would seem that with such a workforce shortage these days, allowing people with asylum status to work more easily would be great. Sue, you had a question.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You've made wonderful case for the humanitarian side of allowing asylum, and I appreciate everything that you've all said, and Khaleel for sharing your story. But there's also a very practical side to it. We need people to work here in our restaurants and our factories and throughout our economy. So when an asylum seeker comes and they can't work for a year, 2 years, whatever it might be, or they're allowed to work for a certain period of time, but then their parole is up and they have to wait and their lives are disrupted. That hurts them because they obviously can't bring in any funds, can't take care of themselves. And so it's totally up to the kindness of people around them. And we have all kinds of job openings. So it's, just looking at it in a practical side, and I don't want to ignore the humanitarian side because that really is where it's at, but I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, that's great. So is there any, and I understand there is no simple policy fix these days, but are there any policy fixes that you think could get the support necessary to make this process a little bit easier, whether that's increased funding for more courts and judges to speed the process, or things like that?
Well, I will say maybe the easiest change is don't boo, vote. Like, you just have to vote. Just vote. Tell everybody to vote. Drive someone to the polls. Vote. Because the political branches of the government act on the people's mandate. And if we vote, they will do the thing that we're asking them to do. I believe that a lot of the rhetoric that we're getting about deadlocks and things like that are because it's easy to make a story about things being deadlocked, but if the American people are looking for something, then our legislators are supposed to be doing that thing. So y'all gotta vote. I think policy-wise, if we cannot pass laws that are more nimble and have caught up to where we are in the world today, work permits that make sense are maybe the biggest change, because as has been lifted up, especially here in New Hampshire, we are an aging population. We don't have a lot of people. We need, our economy needs people. And one of the points that was lifted up during the refugee one a couple weeks ago was that whole communities are depending on factories and companies that might be closing because they don't have people to work those jobs. And so I think if there's like a state interest here, it's that we need people who can come to this country and who can work. And I think something that the Biden administration is doing now is instead of approving work permits for 2 years, they're now approving them for 5 years. So that is a big deal and a big change. So if someone can work for 5 years, it takes the sort of backlog on people applying for work permits out of the system so that the system can handle other applications, but also it helps people who rely on those work permits, people and companies, because it gives you security. Like if I get a job, I can be able to work this job for 5 years. And an employer feels secure if I give this person a job, they're not going to lose their ability to work in the next year and a half, in the next 2 years. And this is a change that happened last month, I think. So Khaleel is looking at me like, missed it by that much.
People on parole, I don't think, is it?
No, for people on parole, it's still 2 years, and we need longer periods of parole. So if this is what a nimble thing can happen is like, yeah, give us more parole, give it to us for longer years, and Congress needs to change the law. The law needs to catch up to where we are at.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is the Boston USCIS
Slower than the rest of the country? It seems to be, from my personal experience of people, knowing people. But
That
do you
is
know
a-
that?
That is a big bureaucracy question. So within the immigration agency, as we think of it, there's DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and then under that, sub-agencies like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is ICE, so immigration police, but also prosecutors. There's the USCIS Asylum Office, which is different from USCIS regular office that grants benefits like green cards for marriages, green cards for employment, things like that. And then there's like the Department of Justice, which runs the immigration courts. So it's many agencies all overseeing immigration writ large, but super complicated. And I think, so in terms of asylum, I think the numbers out of the Boston Asylum Agency, so USCIS, I think they have several 100,000 asylum applications pending, and the immigration court has more than that. So there's people who can ask for asylum directly through USCIS, like Khaleel, and then people who have to ask for asylum before the immigration court. So, you know, we could easily be talking about close to 1 million cases, and it's a lot of cases that people need to hear. So a policy change, again, can be more money for all of these things, so you can hire more judges, you can hire more asylum officers, you can hire all the clerks that it takes to process all of these applications, all the prosecutors it takes to prosecute all of these cases. We're the taxpayers, so we should vote. Yeah.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. If there, Renee, did you still have one?
No, I gave up.
Okay, you gave up.
When one person decided to tell you, I'm going to say.
Yep. Okay, Becky.
A quick question. When we talk about asylum seekers, people often think of the southern border, and that's kind of they think a lot of times, and people that I talk to, they think that's the only way people come in. Is there any difference in the timing or the processing of asylum cases when people don't come over the southern border but come through other means?
Before it gets answered, Becky, could you talk a bit about your exhibit?
Okay, well, for anybody interested, I have a photography, art, and poetry exhibit at UNH in the Diamond Library, and it's I spent about 1.5 years photographing a man who was seeking asylum from an African country. I can't tell you the country, and it's a very large exhibit with large black and white photographs printed on canvas. It's quite a spectacular exhibit, not only because of the photography, but I think it's greatly enhanced by the panels on each photograph of this man's words, of his poetry showing his anguish and heartache, being separated from his family and going through many of the uncertain conditions of asylum seeking that Khaleel has so well expressed. So it's going to be there through the 27th of January, then it's going to the Mariposa Museum in Peterborough, and then it's going to an art gallery down in Northampton, Massachusetts. So if you want more information, feel free to contact me. And did you get my question? Yes. But thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Becky. I really wanted to lift that up. It's an amazing exhibit. Everybody should go see it. The difference between people who are seeking asylum, so anybody who's in the United States or who has shown up at the border can ask for asylum. And the professor has explained how seeking asylum is a right, it's a human right. But the difference in processing really depends not so much on where you lodge the application in terms of like the USCIS office or the immigration court, but where in terms of like the physical location. There are places where so if you're in the southern border, those places just see way more asylum cases than here in the north. So their numbers and their processing time is just going to be higher than we have up here. But again, Boston is still one of the top places that people resettle once they come into the United States. So our numbers are going to be higher. But the general consensus is about 6 to 10 years for an asylum seeker to apply for asylum and then get a decision on that asylum application. It's not always asylum granted. Sometimes it's not, but about 6 to 10 years for that decision. We were sharing sort of war stories before we started, and I was telling the folks that the case that I've had for someone who's been waiting for their asylum case the longest is she entered the United States with a visa in 1999 and applied for asylum and did not get a decision from the asylum office until 2014. She was not granted asylum. She was referred to the immigration court, and we're still in the immigration court. Now, COVID actually plays a big part of this because shutdowns and all of those things. But yeah, so that's a very long time. I was trying to do the math in my head, but I went to law school, not math school, so I will not embarrass myself. But a long time to wait for the certainty that Khaleel was sharing, like you're here in this invisible prison, you can't really leave, you can't really go back. Life has moved on without you outside the United States, and she's still waiting for that certainty that, okay, yeah, this is home. This is gonna be my last place.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to just give our panelists an opportunity for any final thoughts.
Well, I just wanted to follow that up, not with my own words, but those of a Turkish-American political scientist who I strongly recommend in terms of her books, but Sayla Ben Habib, and she wrote, "The virtues of liberal democracies do not consist in their capacities to close their borders, but in their capacities to hear the claims of those who, for whatever reasons, knock at our doors."
Mm. That is powerful, and I don't know how to top that. But I mean, to me, we talked a little bit, you asked a little bit about the changes needed at this point to simplify this process for people. Yeah, it is the law, it's the policies. I personally, particularly in the last year, got to much better know the officers that were working on my case, like, including several officers at the Boston Asylum office, and I developed much better understanding of the held up there for my case and many other people that I knew. They're extremely overwhelmed by, as you said, hundreds of thousands of cases. They're extremely underfunded. They really wanted to help. They cared for the challenges that I was going through. I developed a habit of going to the Boston Asylum office every other Friday, because they only accept, there is only walk-in hours every Friday morning to noon. Every other Friday I would drive to Boston, go there just to pop in and ask for updates on my case. Ultimately that may have expedited the process of making the decision, but the officers themselves had little understanding of where my case was, was stuck in background checks. So, and every time I need to submit an update for them, it's like I'm someone new to the agency. I mean, it's USCIS, they know everything about me, but I need to tell them where I'm from, what countries I passed through, what is my status. I need to prove my identity. I need to start from scratch every time I make a connection, request an update or a renewal. Again, I believe it is very overdue for the country to modernize this process and take a fresh look at asylum seekers in particular. That's more humane. That gives them the dignity that they expect from this great country.
What more can be said apart from, I really can't say anything apart from thanking all of you for coming here and being interested in this topic, because the thing that changes the world is when people are interested in the injustice that they see and then they say, I'm going to do something about that. And I really hope we do something about it, because there is a lot of injustice in the world, and in whatever small way we can do the work of accompaniment and walk with people through difficult things and give them their agency back and give them their humanity back, I think that's the work. And I'm really glad you guys are here trying to do the work.
Great. Well, thank you to our wonderful panel. Thank you for everyone who joined us here in person, everyone watching online, and those who are watching the recording. We really appreciate your time and your interest in this topic. Thank you again to the New Hampshire Fulbright and to Building Community in New Hampshire for your support to make this series possible. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a great night.
It was